Welcome back to her Fireside Stories. The day my future daughter-in-law told me to stay in my lane, I quietly pulled every dollar from the wedding fund, then watched the entire spectacle crash and burn. I never wanted revenge. I wanted respect. But after being dismissed, mocked, and reduced to a background prop in my own son's life, I realized something painful. Love without boundaries turns into permission to be erased. I had saved for years to give him the wedding I never had, and in return, I was treated like a relic. So I stepped back, not in anger, but in dignity. And when their $55,000 planner disappeared in a scam, I didn't say I told you so. I said nothing, because sometimes silence is the loudest form of truth. This is a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimately reconciliation between a mother and her son. And if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, you might see yourself in my story. I never imagined the day would come when my own daughter-in-law would glare at me over a table full of color swatches and say, "Stay in your lane," as if I'd somehow veered off the road of acceptable behavior. But that's exactly what happened, and the shock nearly broke me. My name is Aurelia Royce, and I've spent most of my life working as a wedding planner in Boston, orchestrating other people's happiest days with a dedication that once made my name well known in certain social circles. I'm a short, petite woman of 62 with a sleek silver bob that I maintain with monthly trims. Nothing too fancy, but enough to feel polished. My late husband Joseph used to say, "I'd look elegant even if I rolled out of bed and into a board meeting." I never quite believed that, but his words always made me smile. When I officially retired from wedding planning 5 years ago, I thought my organizing days were over. I was satisfied with the legacy I'd left behind: the pristine schedules, the tearful toasts, the dance floors that sparkled under warm lights. I looked forward to simpler pursuits, gardening, the occasional ceramic class, and spoiling my only son, Ethan Royce. He has his father's eyes, a sharp sea blue, and for most of his life, we've been close. After Joseph passed away, Ethan became my rock, calling me daily and checking in whenever possible. So imagine my joy when he announced one spring afternoon that he was getting married to Veronica Moore, a social media manager who just moved to town tall, with waist-length black hair that seemed perpetually photo-ready. Veronica was always impeccably dressed. She exuded an image of someone who lived for her next online post, her next big public moment. That day, Ethan told me the news. I nearly leapt out of my chair with excitement. I pictured a sweet, intimate ceremony, my dear boy finally finding his other half. I thought of how my decades of wedding planning experience might come in handy, not to commandeer the event, but to be there as a guiding force. Someone who could gently steer them toward beautiful choices and help them avoid typical pitfalls. But I soon learned that Veronica had a different vision altogether, one that didn't include me in any significant way. If only I had known how drastically that vision would reshape our family dynamic. It all started innocently enough. Ethan brought Veronica by the house for a Sunday dinner, a ritual we'd kept since he was in high school. I made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and steamed vegetables, a simple meal Joseph and I used to cook when we wanted something comforting. Veronica glided into the kitchen, complimented my decor, and mentioned that she loved vintage vibes for personal styling, but preferred ultra-modern aesthetics for big events. I remember smiling politely, not entirely sure how to respond to a statement that sounded a bit like a marketing slogan. Still, I was determined to make her feel welcome. As we sat down to eat, conversation turned to the wedding. Veronica launched into her plans, a theme centered on digital minimalism, complete with live streaming on multiple platforms and a color palette of stark whites and metallic accents. I nodded, imagining how we could balance the high-tech elements with something warm and personal. When I mentioned I'd be happy to help, maybe by recommending a local florist or a reliable caterer, she gave a polite little laugh. "Oh, I'm sure you have great taste," she said. "But I'm working with a planner who specializes in modern aesthetics. With social media flair. Her tone was clipped final. That night after they left, I tried to brush off the sting by rationalizing that maybe she just wanted to take the reins. I reminded myself that modern brides often have strong opinions, curated from countless wedding blogs and influencer feeds. And though I'd planned large galas and intimate ceremonies for decades, the times had changed. Maybe Veronica didn't realize I was still current with my ideas. My retirement hadn't exactly dulled my sense of style. But a faint worry set in. Ethan looked slightly apologetic when he hugged me goodbye. That hug told me I'm sorry in advance for what's coming. I brushed it aside, choosing to focus on the excitement of my son's engagement rather than the ominous feeling creeping up on me. Little did I know I was tiptoeing into one of the most humiliating chapters of my life. About a week later, Veronica texted me an invitation to a brunch with her mother, Lorraine Moore, and two of her bridesmaids. We'll be chatting about wedding vibes. Read the message followed by a flurry of bride and ring emojis. I decided to attend, hoping to offer a few suggestions without pushing too hard. I wore a light floral dress that day, making sure my silver bob was freshly styled. I even spritzed on the rosewater perfume Joseph had once bought me, hoping to feel a bit more confident. When I arrived at the chic cafe downtown, they were already deep in conversation about neon sign backdrops and the perfect angle for capturing photos that would pop on social feeds. Veronica sat there, phone in hand, scrolling through some influencer's video. Lorraine Moore, who had a neatly layered bob in a caramel color, expensive and meticulously styled, was sipping tea, nodding along. The bridesmaids, each with hair carefully coiffed into glossy waves, chimed in with squeals of excitement. I felt a generation removed, as if I'd just walked into a world run by hashtags and likes. Still, I smiled and slid into an empty seat, the polite mother of the groom. As soon as there was a lull in the chatter, I opened a small binder I'd brought. It contained a few color palette ideas, subtle creams, lavender sprigs, maybe a hint of gold. They were timeless suggestions I'd found worked wonders in all sorts of venues. If you're interested, I offered softly. Veronica took one quick glance, waved a hand dismissively, and said, "Thanks, Aurelia, but I want something futuristic and edgy, not too traditional." She elongated the word traditional like it was some relic of an ancient civilization. Her mother leaned in, eyes flicking to my binder. "So you used to be a wedding planner, dear. That's so quaint." Her tone, the pause before quaint, it cut more than any outright insult. The brunch continued without another glance at my ideas. I tried to hide my discomfort, but inside I was reeling. This was the first open sign that I wasn't merely overshadowed, I was actively dismissed. When I got home from that brunch, I sat in my car for a long time, keys in the ignition, but the engine off. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair looked as put together as ever, but I felt like I'd aged 10 years since morning. My mind returned to my early days as a wedding planner, how I'd navigated fussy brides, sharp-tongued mothers-in-law logistical nightmares. Yet never before had I felt this particular brand of scorn, like I was a relic from a past era that no one cared to remember. Inside the house, I settled at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, my old remedy for stress. The phone was beside me, silent. Ethan hadn't texted or called to ask how things went. I found that strange because in the past, he would have checked in. Perhaps he felt caught in the middle, unsure of how to balance my feelings. With Veronica's bold approach, my chest felt tight with unspoken worries. Would I ever get the chance to be a real part of this wedding, or was I doomed to watch from the sidelines? Still, I tried not to let doubt consume me. I reminded myself how weddings often put everyone on edge. Veronica probably wanted a sense of independence. It wasn't necessarily about me. Maybe it was about her own insecurities or her desire to prove something. And so I resolved to keep my head high and remain open-minded. This is temporary, I told myself. Once the dust settles, they'll remember who I am and what I can offer. That's how I rationalized it, at least. But days turned into weeks with no calls from Veronica. The text chain between me and Ethan was reduced to mundane pleasantries. Hope you're well. Mom or busy week. Talk soon. The wedding talk seemed to vanish from our conversations like an elephant in the room. We both pretended not to see. I wondered what was going on behind closed doors. Were they forging ahead without me? Or was the planning at a standstill? And if they were moving forward, what exactly did that mean for my place in Ethan's life? I decided to invite them both over for dinner, a nostalgic pot roast meal I'd perfected over decades. My hope was that around the dinner table in the warmth of home, we might find a gentler way to discuss the wedding. I set the table with linen napkins, lit a few candles, and put on soft jazz. Nothing too intrusive, just a little background ambiance. I even prepared a freshly baked cherry pie, Ethan's longtime favorite. They arrived 30 minutes late, Veronica with her phone in hand swiping through messages. She complained about the smell of the meat, mentioning she'd been trying a plant-based diet. Ethan shrugged apologetically, but the apology came only in the form of a pained expression. We settled in for dinner. I remember noticing how Ethan's hair, usually short and neatly parted, had grown a bit shaggy, almost as if he'd neglected his usual trim. He looked tired, the bags under his eyes more pronounced. I tried to direct conversation toward the wedding, asking if they'd chosen a caterer or decided on a photographer. Veronica answered with curt statements like, "Oh, we have a modern approach, and we're not going for something mainstream. No details, no real conversation." Finally, toward dessert, I gently suggested a seamstress. I knew an old friend who had a knack for blending modern cuts with timeless fabrics. Veronica tapped her foot under the table. "I've already got someone from the West Coast in mind," she declared. "She's on social media, super cutting edge. I just feel like we have very different tastes." Aurelia, and then that dreaded line again. "I really think it's best if everyone stays in their lane. I don't want confusion." My throat felt thick, but I mustered a smile. I cleared the plates and boxed up some leftovers. They barely touched. As they left, Ethan gave me a quick hug, but it felt hollow. I watched them walk down the front steps, noticing Veronica's long, smooth hair, catching the glow from the porch light. For a moment, I yearned for a sign of sincerity from her, but all I saw was her fingers still tapping away on her phone, as if I were an afterthought. That night, as I tidied up the kitchen, I found myself wrestling with the humiliating reality that my presence was not just unappreciated, it was unwanted. I'd spent decades guiding couples through the myriad details of wedding planning, from seating charts to floral arrangements. Yet here I was, the mother of the groom, effectively told to back off. My heart ached, not just because of Veronica's rudeness, but because Ethan said so little in my defense. Was this who he had become, or was he just too overwhelmed to intervene? Sipping a mug of herbal tea before bed, I felt the storm inside me intensify. I'd promised Joseph years ago that we'd give Ethan the wedding. We never had the luxury to afford. We'd saved a modest sum, specifically for that purpose, little by little. It was meant to be a gift, no strings attached, and I'd always envisioned being intimately involved in the planning. Now it felt like I was paying for my own exclusion. As I poured the last of my tea down the sink, a question formed. What if I simply withdrew my support? It was a startling thought, one that initially struck me as bitter or petty. I'd raised Ethan to be gracious, and I prided myself on being fair. Cutting the fund felt vengeful. Yet, a small part of me argued that I was enabling disrespect. If they wanted me to stay in my lane, maybe I should, and staying in my lane would mean letting them finance their extravagant vision on their own. My mind whirled with the implications, the moral dilemma. Ultimately, I decided not to act in anger, but to wait and see if there would be any olive branch extended, any apology offered. Time kept slipping by with no resolution. Meanwhile, Veronica's extravagant wedding plans continued to escalate, fueled by social media trends and influencers I'd never heard of. That's when I received a desperate call from Ethan about a month later, and my entire perspective shifted. Subscribe for more heartfelt stories and personal insights. Your support helps us share tales that matter. Mom, Ethan said over the phone, his voice tight with anxiety. Veronica just hired this famous wedding planner. She's charging a fortune and we're short on funds. The name was Sabrina Bloom, a self-styled social media wedding architect with a massive following online. She specialized in over-the-top celebrations that trended on video platforms. The fee, a staggering sum that left me breathless, $55,000, and that was just for her basic package. I could hear the tension in Ethan's voice. He was caught in Veronica's vision, one that seemed to revolve around Instagram moments more than the sanctity of marriage. It was the antithesis of how Joseph and I once dreamed of celebrating our union. Small, heartfelt, personal. Veronica is sure it'll be worth it. Ethan continued, sounding defeated. Sabrina's promising brand partnerships, sponsored hashtags. She says it could offset costs, maybe even cover the honeymoon. I felt my pulse race. In my years of planning, I'd never heard of such a scheme. Sponsored hashtags and brand deals. For a wedding, weddings in my mind were about love families merging the promise of a future shared. Could it really be turned into a marketing spectacle? What do you need from me? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Ethan hesitated. Veronica thought, well, she assumed you'd be covering a good chunk, if not all of the wedding costs. She said you've always hinted you'd pay for it. I clutched the phone, my knuckles going white. This wasn't just Veronica's arrogance. It was also a major assumption. At that moment, the words "stay in your lane" echoed in my head. If I was so unwelcome in their planning, why should my money be front and center? I exhaled slowly. Ethan, I saved that money for you out of love, not obligation, but I won't be part of a spectacle that excludes me completely. Silence fell on the line. Then he sighed. I understand, Mom, but she's gonna freak out. Hearing the resignation in his voice, I realized our relationship was not the anchor it once was. He was drifting, tethered more to Veronica's ambitions than to the values we once shared. Despite my growing resolve, I didn't immediately withdraw the entire sum. Instead, I wrote a modest check, a fraction of what I'd originally intended to give, and included a brief note. Wishing you both joy on your special day. May it be filled with genuine love. Then I mailed it to their apartment. It was my way of saying, I'm still here, but I won't be treated like a doormat. It felt bittersweet, as though I were letting go of a dream I'd cradled for years. Days passed and I heard nothing. No thank you note, no call, not even a text message. When I finally ran into Ethan at a grocery store parking lot, I braced myself for awkwardness. He looked run down, wearing a simple hoodie and jeans, hair even more unruly than before. It was a far cry from the crisp, confident young man who'd once walked these aisles with me, teasing me about my penchant for coupon clipping. Mom, he said softly. Veronica was upset about the check, or the size of it, rather. My heart squeezed. All those years of saving thousands of dollars meant to ensure he had a beautiful day, and Veronica was upset because it wasn't the full amount she expected. Sabrina's demanding her fees up front, he continued, eyes downcast. We're locked into a contract now. A swirl of emotions overwhelmed me. I wanted to protect Ethan from a bad decision, but at the same time, he'd made it. He'd allowed Veronica to lead him down this road. If I bailed them out, would it just reinforce her dismissive attitude toward me? I took a deep breath. Ethan, a marriage can't start by shackling yourself to debt and illusions, I said gently. Are you sure about all this? He shook his head slightly but shrugged. It's what she wants. I studied him, searching for the bright-eyed child I once knew. He seemed lost, overshadowed by Veronica's flamboyance. We parted ways with a half-hearted hug, neither of us sure where we stood. I drove home feeling like a spectator, watching someone else's crisis unfold, painfully aware that I had no true power to intervene unless I was willing to sacrifice my dignity all over again. Then came the day that changed everything. A frantic voicemail from Ethan at 8 in the morning. Mom, call me back right away. It's urgent. My heart pounded as I dialed his number. He picked up almost instantly, and I could tell from his shaky breath that something was seriously wrong. Veronica's wedding planner ghosted us, he said, words tumbling out in a panic. Sabrina Bloom took the deposit, but now she's disappeared. The website's down. The phone's disconnected, and all her social media profiles are wiped. I felt a cold wave wash over me. What do you mean, disappeared? I asked. He explained how Sabrina had demanded the entire $55,000 fee up front, promising premium vendors a star-studded guest list and even brand sponsorship deals for the wedding. They'd wired the money only to find out later too late that the references Sabrina had provided were fake. We've been scammed, Ethan whispered. My mind flashed through every warning sign I'd ever known as a planner, insisting on upfront payments, no clear business license, an over-the-top sales pitch. How had they not seen this coming? Veronica was apparently inconsolable, blaming Ethan for not securing my full financial support in time, blaming everyone but herself. She says it wouldn't have happened if we just trusted you or your network, he admitted. The irony made my head spin. They'd wanted me out of the picture, claiming I was outdated. Now, in their moment of desperation, they realized the value of experience. I tried to quell the surge of anger rising in my throat. They have to learn this lesson, I told myself, though I felt pangs of pity for Ethan. He'd gotten caught in Veronica's storm. What do you need from me? I asked. Money advice, my question hung in the air. I'm not sure, he said finally. Veronica wants her deposit back, but we both know it's gone. We've canceled so many other options because we bet everything on Sabrina. Now there's no venue, no vendors, no planner, and we're pretty much out of funds. I sat at my kitchen table clutching the phone, trying to process the magnitude of what Ethan had told me. In some ways, it felt like the end of a Greek tragedy, hubris leading to a downfall, and as much as part of me felt a grim sense of vindication, I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest. This was my son, after all. I had once cradled him in my arms, read him bedtime stories, patched up his scraped knees. Now he was in the middle of a catastrophic financial mess, tied to a fiancé who held me in contempt. Ethan, I said, inhaling slowly, I'm sorry this happened, but you both made these decisions without me. I can't just swoop in and fix everything. There was a pained silence on the other end. I know, he finally said, voice cracking. We didn't think it through. Veronica's devastated. She wants to postpone the wedding indefinitely. Days turned into a whirlwind of rumors and gossip among the friends and relatives who had heard about the scam. Veronica retreated from public view, stopped posting her usual flow of selfies and wedding teasers. Lorraine, her mother, quietly hinted to mutual acquaintances that they were exploring legal action, but against whom the ephemeral Sabrina Bloom had vanished without a trace. No contract, no address, no recourse. Meanwhile, I found myself in the odd position of being both concerned parent and outcast. My extended family kept asking me for details. Did you know something like this would happen? Why didn't you help them more? Weren't you going to pay for the wedding? It took all my restraint to maintain a calm demeanor and reply politely that Ethan and Veronica had insisted on a different path. The subtext was clear. They didn't want the benefit of my experience. Quietly, I called some old contacts in the industry to see if anyone had heard of Sabrina Bloom. What came back was a swirl of similar stories couples left in the lurch. Suspicious contracts, money lost. Sabrina was a ghost with a pattern of scamming. My heart sank not just for Ethan, but for all those couples who'd fallen for a fraud cloaked in glamour. Veronica's dream wedding crumbled, and with it, so did her relationship with Ethan. Within weeks, rumors spread that she'd moved back in with her mother. By the time autumn leaves started to turn, the wedding was off. No official announcements were made. It was simply understood guests who'd received save the date cards quietly removed the event from their calendars. I watched from the sidelines, feeling more sadness for Ethan than for the ruined wedding. He was left embarrassed and practically broke, forced to sublet his overpriced apartment. Once Veronica took her share of any refunds, what little remained of them. In the aftermath, he stopped calling as often, too ashamed, I suppose, to face me. I'd hear tidbits from other relatives. Ethan's working long hours, or he's been spending weekends alone. I wanted to reach out to comfort him, but the memory of being told to stay in my lane weighed heavily on my heart. This was a lesson he seemed to need to learn on his own. One evening, as I cleaned out a closet full of my old planning binders, I came across the notebook labeled Wedding Savings. It contained notes Joseph and I had made ideas about how we'd gift the money to Ethan. We'd scribbled things like Ethan's dream day, and he'll never have to worry about funding. The realization that I'd withheld that large sum felt simultaneously heartbreaking and empowering. I had not abandoned my son, but I had upheld my self-respect. If only Ethan and Veronica had shown me even a sliver of real appreciation, I might have happily poured my savings into their day. But I couldn't force people to value me. Letting out a deep sigh, I carefully placed that notebook back on the shelf Joseph used to say, "Love them enough to let them fail if they refuse to listen." It had always sounded harsh to me, but now I understood. My role was to be supportive, not a doormat. And if supporting meant stepping back, then that's exactly what I'd done, even as it tore at me inside. Winter crept in, and with it came a hushed stillness in my house. I filled my days by rediscovering passions I'd put on hold. I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the local community center, surprising myself with how tranquil it felt to blend soft hues on canvas. I met new people, some retirees, some middle-aged folks, looking for a creative outlet. In casual conversations, I found a new sense of identity, one that didn't revolve around being the mother of the groom or the woman who used to plan weddings. Occasionally, I'd run into acquaintances at the market who'd timidly ask about Ethan and Veronica. I'd offer a polite smile and say something vague like, "They're going their separate ways," or "It just didn't work out." Inside, a swirl of regret and relief coexisted. I regretted that Ethan's big day had ended so disastrously, but I was relieved that the toxic cycle of demands and dismissals was over. The turning point came during one of those chilly afternoons when I was sitting in my living room reading a mystery novel with a soft blanket draped over my legs. My phone buzzed. I picked it up, expecting a spam call or a reminder from the pharmacy. Instead, Ethan's name lit up the screen. My heart skipped a beat. We hadn't really spoken in depth for months. He sounded subdued, almost childlike. "Mom, can I come over?" he asked. Of course I said yes, and within half an hour he was on my porch, looking like he'd lost both weight and a certain spark in his eyes. His short, dark hair was trimmed again, though, and he wore a neat coat. It was a glimmer of the Ethan I remembered, someone who took pride in his appearance, someone with quiet dignity. We sat in the kitchen sipping tea. Finally, he opened up about the breakup. Veronica had blamed him for the scam, for not pushing me harder to finance their extravagant vision. She'd claimed she never wanted a big wedding, that she'd been pressured to make a splash. The contradictions were staggering. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to dissect her lies. Ethan sighed. "I was so blinded by wanting to make her happy, Mom, that I didn't realize how far off track we'd gotten." Enjoying the story? Don't miss out. Subscribe to our channel for more long-form narratives and updates. As Ethan sat across from me, it was as if the weight of the past year collapsed between us. He admitted how he felt torn between the woman he thought he loved and the mother who'd always been in his corner. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you, he murmured, eyes downcast. I let her treat you like an afterthought. I see that now. My throat tightened and I reached out to grip his hand. I could feel the trembling there, the remorse. We talked for hours, the daylight fading into evening, and still we barely scratched the surface of all we needed to say. He told me how Veronica's obsession with online validation overshadowed any real emotional connection, how the wedding turned into a performance piece. He confessed the relief he felt when it all ended. Even though it was cloaked in shame and financial ruin, I listened, not gloating, just absorbing his confession with the unconditional love I'd always held for him. Somewhere around the second cup of tea, he looked up and gave me a small, sad smile. You must have thought I was a fool, he said. I shook my head. No, Ethan, I thought you were in love, and I respected that. But love should never make you feel powerless or invisible. A tear slipped down his cheek. The man I raised to be strong was showing me his vulnerability, and in that vulnerability, our bond strengthened anew. I offered him the spare room if he needed a break from the city. I appreciate it, Mom, he said, but I'll manage. I just needed to see you. We parted with a long hug at the front door, the chilly winter air biting at our cheeks. As he walked away, I felt something shift inside me, an unspoken forgiveness. Perhaps not a complete restoration of what was lost, but the start of a new chapter. The wound wasn't gone, but it was beginning to close. And in the quiet that followed, I realized I'd stayed true to myself. I'd enforced boundaries, and finally Ethan understood why. After that heartfelt talk, Ethan and I began rebuilding our relationship piece by piece. He'd swing by on weekends for a casual lunch, sometimes with a book under his arm, stories he wanted to share with me. I introduced him to my newfound love of watercolor painting. To my surprise, he joined me in the class, one Saturday leading to laughter when his attempt at painting a sunset looked more like spilled juice on paper. Moments like these reminded me that we still had our mother-son dynamic, that it wasn't lost in the chaos of the wedding fiasco. I also heard through the grapevine that Veronica and her mother were embroiled in some messy legal pursuit to track down the elusive Sabrina Bloom. Rumor had it that they weren't the only victims. Sabrina had orchestrated similar scams across multiple states. For months, wedding blogs and local news outlets reported stories of couples losing tens of thousands of dollars. Some couples had to cancel their ceremonies entirely. It was a colossal mess, one that Veronica had contributed to by trusting a flashy online persona more than a genuine support system. Yet I refused to dwell on their drama. Instead, I focused on healing not just with Ethan, but within myself. The knowledge that my expertise had been cast aside so thoughtlessly had stung my pride. But seeing Ethan return humbled and aware soothed that hurt. He never directly asked me for financial help with his debts. He seemed determined to fix his own mistakes, taking on extra freelance work to pay off the burden. I respected that. It showed me he had learned something from all this. Meanwhile, in the evenings, I'd often revisit my old wedding photo albums, photos of me and Joseph wide-eyed and eager for the future. We'd married with barely any savings, yet we made it special because our love was genuine. Those pictures reminded me that no matter how trendy weddings become at their core, they're about the union of two people genuinely willing to cherish each other. It was that sincerity so lacking in Veronica's approach that set a true foundation for a lasting marriage. Spring arrived, bringing with it a renewed sense of possibility. The magnolia tree in my front yard burst into pale pink blossoms, and I found myself thinking about growth, both literal and metaphorical. Perhaps it was time to embrace the next chapter more boldly. I decided to open a small consultancy, not a full-fledged wedding planning business. My retirement from that world was still mostly intact, but a space where I could mentor young couples who wanted meaningful weddings without the social media circus, I called it. Garden Path Consultations. a nod to the tranquil personal touch I hoped to offer, rather than big budgets and glitzy affairs. I focused on smaller gatherings, couples who wanted intimacy, authenticity, and a dash of creativity. Word spread quickly through my old network. Slowly, an eclectic roster of clients trickled in, a pair of librarians who dreamed of a book-themed soiree, a couple of chefs wanting a farm-to-table feast, and a second marriage pair looking for a simple vow renewal by the sea. Each project filled me with a sense of fulfillment I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just someone's mother in law or a background figure. I was once again using my talents in a way that resonated with my heart. Ethan cheered me on, occasionally dropping by to see how my consultations were progressing. He even helped me set up a basic website. Ironic given how technology had played such a pernicious role in Veronica's wedding fiasco. But I trusted Ethan's approach. He was measured, avoiding flashy claims, simply stating, an experienced planner, helping couples craft genuine celebrations. Around this time, I noticed a new twinkle in Ethan's eyes. He'd casually mentioned someone named Celine, a colleague from work with whom he'd been grabbing coffee. He'd grin in that shy way he used to when he was a teenager, talking about a crush I didn't press for details. But it warmed my heart. If anyone deserved a fresh start, it was Ethan. And if this woman was someone who valued genuine connection, perhaps he wouldn't relive the past mistakes. I held on to that hope as I sketched out floral centerpieces for my consultancy clients, the sweet smell of magnolia drifting through my open window. That hope blossomed a few months later when Ethan introduced me to Celine Harrington. She was a teacher at the same technology firm Ethan worked for. She conducted training sessions for new employees. Right away, I noticed her easygoing smile and her soft, shoulder-length curls that framed her face in a warm, friendly way. She wore minimal makeup, her entire style reflecting a calm confidence that radiated from within. Over lunch at my favorite cafe, I saw how she lit up whenever Ethan spoke, genuinely listening to his every word. In turn, Ethan seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. No guarded looks, no tension in his shoulders. They laughed about workplace mishaps and swapped jokes about employees who couldn't figure out the company's system. Celine asked me all sorts of questions, from my background in wedding planning to the watercolor class I'd been taking. I found myself talking freely about color palettes and the intricacies of calligraphy, and she listened with genuine interest rather than the forced politeness I'd grown used to. After Celine excused herself to take a phone call, Ethan turned to me, visibly pleased. "She's nothing like Veronica," he said. "She's patient, she's honest, and she doesn't care about posting every detail of her life online." He lowered his gaze almost shyly. "I haven't felt this comfortable with anyone in a long time." I squeezed his hand. "I can see why you like her," I replied, meaning every word. In the back of my mind, I felt a cautious optimism. I didn't want to jump ahead and imagine weddings or future grandchildren. God knew I'd learn to be wary of illusions, but it was nice to see my son smiling a real, unguarded smile for the first time in ages. As we left the cafe, I gave them both a warm hug. Something inside me stirred a sense that we were on the right track, free from the toxic undertones that had marred our family's most recent attempt at a wedding. Maybe this time, if they ever got serious, the bond would grow from honesty rather than spectacle. Over the course of that summer, Ethan and Celine's relationship blossomed. They took weekend trips to the coast, hiked local trails, and discovered hidden coffee shops around the city. Whenever we spoke, Ethan seemed genuinely happy, a contentment that wasn't performance-based or fragile. Meanwhile, my own life found a harmonious balance. Garden path consultations brought in just enough work to keep me engaged, but not overwhelmed. I helped couples plan simpler, heartfelt ceremonies in backyards, small halls, or beaches at sunset. Each event reminded me why I'd fallen in love with wedding planning in the first place, not for grandeur, but for the joy of uniting two souls. Sometimes I'd share these stories with Ethan and Celine. she'd beam with excitement and ask how the couples chose their themes. Her curiosity about what made each wedding unique struck me as profoundly different from Veronica's hyper-focus on aesthetics and trends. Celine once said, "A wedding should reflect a couple's journey, right? Not just a curated photo shoot." That single sentence validated years of my own beliefs. Ethan's hair was back to its neat, short style, parted on the side, showcasing a calm self-assurance. Celine herself sometimes styled her hair in a loose bun or let her natural curls flow freely depending on her mood. They both seemed to eschew the hollow chase for external validation, preferring real connections with friends and family. I realized I'd never once heard them argue about how a post or photo would look online. One warm evening as we sipped iced tea on my porch, the conversation naturally turned to their future. Celine mentioned how much she admired the simplicity of small weddings. "I'd want something outdoorsy with just the people we love," she said. Ethan nodded, his eyes flicking to me, a hint of anticipation in his gaze. I smiled. I knew what he was silently asking. Would you help us if the time comes? After everything we'd been through, it felt like a question, weighted with unspoken apologies and gratitude. I didn't answer directly, but my smile spoke volumes. Yes, it said. Yes, I would be honored. Autumn arrived in a swirl of rust-colored leaves, and with it came an unexpected phone call. "Mom." Ethan began a noticeable tremor in his voice. "Celine and we're engaged." I almost dropped the coffee mug I was holding, partly from excitement, partly from nervous memories. Without hesitation, I replied, "That's wonderful, sweetheart," even as my heart fluttered with an old fear. What if this goes like last time? I pushed it aside. Celine was not Veronica. This was a fresh chapter. Ethan confided that the proposal had been intimate. He'd taken her on a stroll by the waterfront at sunset, knelt down in the sand, and offered her a simple ring. She'd said yes before he could even finish his heartfelt speech. No Instagram live stream, no crowd of spectators, just them. The next day they told immediate family, and then Ethan called me. "Celine wants to talk to you about the wedding." He said, a note of anticipation in his voice. "She has questions and she values your experience." Those words, "she values your experience," brought tears to my eyes. They were the polar opposite of "stay in your lane." The next evening, Celine came over. We had tea at my kitchen table and she explained her ideas. No massive guest list, just around 50 people, close friends and relatives. The venue, a botanical garden she'd visited as a child, one that had special meaning to her family. She wanted a ceremony at dusk, fairy lights twinkling in the bushes, a short, honest exchange of vows, followed by a modest reception with delicious food and heartfelt toasts. "I've never planned a wedding," Celine admitted, brushing back a loose curl that fell over her forehead, "and I'd love any guidance you can offer. But I also don't want to overwhelm you." I reached across the table to pat her hand. "I'd be honored," I said softly, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. This wasn't about controlling a vision. It was about helping two people craft a meaningful celebration. Celine's voice was shaky with gratitude when she thanked me, and in that moment I felt a wound inside me, healing one caused by dismissive words and shattered expectations from the past. If you're enjoying this journey, consider subscribing to stay connected with more stories and personal reflections. Planning for Ethan and Celine's wedding became a joyful endeavor that brought us closer together. We started by discussing budgets openly without assumptions. I offered them a portion of the fund Joseph and I had saved, explaining that it was my gift to them, no strings attached. They accepted graciously, promising not to take my contribution for granted. "We just want a simple yet beautiful day," Celine said, her eyes shining. "We aren't looking for anything flashy, just something that feels like us." Unlike Veronica's approach, which was all about grand illusions and influencer tie ins, Celine's style was grounded. She wanted pastel flowers to complement the greenery of the botanical garden, soft candlelight for an evening glow, and a jazz trio instead of a DJ blasting club anthems. We joked about the possibility of rain. If it came, we'd shift to an indoor conservatory space, still surrounded by plants, still intimate. We divided tasks. Celine took care of the guest list invites and her attire. Ethan oversaw the menu, wanting to ensure there were vegetarian and gluten-free options for a few relatives. I used my industry knowledge to secure a reliable florist, a small local bakery known for exquisite buttercream cakes, and a group of musicians who played elegantly without overshadowing conversations. There was no competition over who was in charge. No battle for the final say, just collaborative effort. I'd meet with them on weekends, sometimes in the bright morning light, other times during lazy afternoons. Celine would show me mood boards she created by hand, cutting out magazine clippings instead of simply pulling everything from a phone app. She'd ask for my opinion, genuinely listening. Ethan would chime in, valuing both her vision and my experience. It was teamwork in the truest sense. Occasionally, I'd get a pang of memory, the fiasco with Veronica, that seemed more like a nightmare now, but I'd shake it off, focusing on the joy unfolding in front of me. Late one afternoon, as we strolled through the botanical garden to confirm final details, I found myself exhaling a wave of peace I hadn't felt in years. I realized that sometimes the path to real love is winding and requires stumbles, but if you keep an open heart, you'll eventually find the right way. The wedding day dawned softly, with a sky dappled in gentle gold and pink hues, an auspicious sign. I thought I arrived early at the garden, wanting to make sure every detail was in place. My heart fluttered with a mix of nerves and excitement as I double-checked the seating arrangement. 25 chairs on each side of the aisle, arranged so that guests could admire the floral archway dripping with lilacs and eucalyptus. The florist, a woman named Marta, whom I'd known for years, was busy placing the final blooms. She waved at me, smiling widely. "Looks perfect, Aurelia. So happy you're back in your element." I'd chosen a soft updo for the occasion, gathering my silver bob into a small bun, adorned with a single white rose pinned near the top, a subtle callback to my wedding planning days. This time, though, I wore it not as a symbol of control, but as a quiet personal celebration. I was the mother of the groom, yes, but I was also someone who had rediscovered her passion. Celine soon arrived with her closest friend, who helped her do final touches on her makeup. She wore a flowy gown in a pale ivory shade, nothing bedazzled or dramatic, just understated elegance. Her shoulder-length curls were parted on one side and pinned back with a vintage hair clip, giving her a gentle, timeless look. When she turned to me, her eyes sparkled with unspoken gratitude. "I can't thank you enough," she whispered, voice trembling. "You made this all come together." Guests began to file in: Ethan's college friends, Celine's colleagues, a handful of relatives from both sides. It wasn't a massive crowd, but it was a gathering of people who genuinely loved them. Soft piano music drifted through the garden, air played by a small trio we'd hired. At one point, I saw Ethan standing at the far end near the floral arch, looking more handsome than ever in a simple suit. When our gazes met, he smiled, eyes shimmering with appreciation. I knew in that moment we'd come full circle. He wasn't that lost, conflicted young man anymore. He was the son I had always believed in. As the ceremony began, the hush that fell over the guests felt sacred. Celine made her way down the aisle, arm linked with her father's. Soft murmurs of admiration rippled through the small crowd. She looked radiant yet completely herself. No over-the-top theatrics, no photographers elbowing each other for the best angle, just an intimate gathering watching two people pledge their lives to one another. The officiant, a warm-voiced family friend, shared anecdotes about Ethan and Celine, drawing laughter when she mentioned how they first connected over a mutual love of old jazz records. When they exchanged vows, their words were simple and heartfelt, crafted with genuine honesty, rather than borrowed from a romantic movie quote. I caught Ethan's voice quivering slightly as he promised to stand by Celine through every storm, and especially in the quiet moments. A lump formed in my throat and tears threatened to spill. This is real, I thought. This is what a wedding is meant to be. After the pronouncement of marriage, they kissed under the arch of lilacs and eucalyptus, and the applause was both thunderous and tender. The reception followed nearby under a canopy of trees wrapped in strings of fairy lights. Tables were set with floral centerpieces. Marta had created small bouquets and glass vases, each arrangement unique. The cake, a two-tiered buttercream masterpiece from the local bakery, sat on a table adorned with fresh greenery. Celine had insisted on trying multiple samples to find the perfect flavor, finally settling on a combination of vanilla sponge with lemon curd filling. During dinner, conversation flowed as guests mingled easily. No one was glued to their phones. No one seemed preoccupied with snapping photos for social media clout. It was a celebration of shared histories and new beginnings. At one point, Celine's father proposed a toast, thanking me for helping make the day run smoothly. "Aurelia, you've blessed us with your expertise and your kindness," he said. My eyes welled up again. In that moment, I didn't just feel like the mother of the groom. I felt like the mother of a new family forming before my eyes. Toward the end of the evening, Ethan came over to where I was sitting. I'd taken a short break from mingling, needing a moment to soak in the atmosphere. The soft glow of the fairy lights reflected in his eyes, making him look younger than his years. "Thank you, Mom," he murmured, taking a seat beside me. "For everything," I rested a hand on his shoulder. "I'm just glad I could be here for you," I replied, voice filled with earnestness. We chatted about the past few months, recalling the heartbreak he'd endured after Veronica's scam and the painful lessons he'd carried forward. I'm not proud of how I handled everything before he admitted brow furrowing, but I'm proud of what I learned, proud of how we managed to come back together. I squeezed his arm gently, letting him know he was forgiven, that I'd never stopped loving him. Meanwhile, Celine was across the reception chatting warmly with a group of guests. Her curls bounced as she laughed at something someone said. I noticed how at ease she was, how she didn't fuss about whether the decor matched the photos or if every angle of the venue was post-worthy. She simply lived in the moment, relishing the happiness that surrounded her. I marveled at the stark contrast between this gathering and the chaotic, unfulfilled plans Veronica once championed. Eventually, Ethan stood and reached out a hand. "Dance with me, Mom," he asked. My heart swelled. He guided me to the dance floor where a gentle waltz was playing. Together we moved slowly, the mother and her grown son swaying under the twinkling lights. I whispered my gratitude for his trust, and he whispered his gratitude for my unyielding support. We both blinked back tears, holding on to each other as the music washed over us. When the song ended, Celine approached, smiling brightly. She reached out to take Ethan's arm, and together they signaled for me to stay to share another dance. It was that sweet, spontaneous kind of gesture that spoke volumes. We were a family in that moment, united by love and understanding, not by showy performances or forced aesthetics. Once the formal festivities wrapped up and most guests started to trickle away, I lingered behind with a few close family members to help tidy up. I insisted on being the one to handle the final details, wanting Ethan and Celine to slip away and enjoy their first night as newlyweds. Despite their protests, I shooed them off, telling them to go savor this special time, while I, the seasoned planner, took care of the rest. It felt good methodically gathering centerpieces, checking off a list of items I'd borrowed from vendors, and ensuring every little detail was in order. It reminded me of my old days staying until the very end, making sure the bride and groom left without worries. But this time, there was a difference in my heart. I wasn't doing it because I was desperate for approval or recognition. I was doing it out of genuine love for a couple who had shown me respect and gratitude. Lorraine Moore's shadow never once crossed my mind. That entire fiasco with Veronica had become distant history, replaced by a night that rang true with sincerity. As I packed up leftover slices of cake and half-finished bottles of wine, I recalled Joseph's voice telling me we'd one day make Ethan the happiest groom around. Maybe it hadn't happened exactly as we'd envisioned. Life rarely follows our neat scripts, but in many ways, this was better. It was real tested by adversity and born from second chances. When the last fairy light was unplugged and the garden was quiet again, I felt a serene calm wash over me. My hair still in its little updo, with the rose pin was a bit looser now, tendrils escaping from the pins, a testimony to the joyful bustle of the evening. I finally pulled the rose out and held it up, letting the moonlight illuminate its petals. I couldn't help but think of it as a symbol, how something so delicate could still remain intact after so much movement and commotion. By the time I drove home, it was well past midnight, the roads nearly deserted, and in that stillness, I found myself smiling, knowing that we'd all taken a difficult journey and arrived at a place of genuine happiness. In the weeks that followed, I returned to my peaceful routines. Garden path consultations still occupied a few hours each day, but I took a well-deserved break from major events, turning away any new couples until after the holidays. I wanted time to reflect on the whirlwind of emotions I'd experienced, the journey from being told, "Stay in your lane," to being embraced as an essential part of Ethan and Celine's celebration was monumental. Word spread about their wedding, not because it went viral online, but because everyone who attended raved about its warmth and authenticity. Friends and family described it as cozy, genuine, and magical in a quiet way. A few people from my old planning days reached out curious about my approach. In a world where so many chase large, Instagrammable events, a humble gathering that centered on love felt refreshing. It was the kind of feedback I cherished, the reason I'd gotten into wedding planning decades ago. Meanwhile, Ethan and Celine settled into married life, renting a modest two-bedroom apartment in a quieter part of town. They often invited me over for Sunday brunch pancakes, fruit salad, freshly brewed coffee. Sometimes we'd talk about the wedding, reminiscing about funny moments like how the ring bearer, Celine's young cousin, nearly dropped the rings at the altar. Other times we spoke about the future, if they planned to travel, whether they wanted children someday. I listened without the pushy meddling that often accompanies motherly advice. My relationship with Ethan felt more solid than ever. He no longer avoided difficult conversations, and I no longer felt the need to hide my feelings. One afternoon over a cup of tea, he admitted, "Mom, I want to say thank you again for not bailing me out with Veronica. It was awful going through that scam, but if you'd just written a giant check, I might never have seen the red flags. I might have gone through with marrying someone who didn't respect me or you." He squeezed my hand, eyes filled with sincerity. "Thank you for letting me learn the hard way. It was the best gift you could have given me." If this story has resonated with you, don't forget to hit subscribe. Join us for more tales of family love and personal growth. Sometimes I think back to that infamous moment when Veronica told me to stay in my lane and how her words cut deeper than any insult I'd ever faced. At the time, I felt powerless, like I had no choice but to abide or become the villain in my own son's life. Yet, in the end, choosing to stay in my lane wasn't an act of submission. It was a quiet stand for self-respect. I removed my financial backing from a spectacle that had no room for me, and by doing so, I set boundaries that ultimately paved the way for a healthier relationship with Ethan. When Ethan and Celine came to me for help, they didn't treat me like an accessory. They treated me as an equal partner in creating something meaningful. Their wedding wasn't about competing with social media stars. It was about family love and a community of people who genuinely cared for them. Ironically, by staying in my lane, I ended up exactly where I belonged at the heart of a celebration that honored love in its truest form. We don't always get to choose how life humbles us, nor do we get to predict the exact path our children will take. Sometimes we watch them collide with their mistakes, and sometimes we're asked to fund those missteps. In those moments, we have to decide whether our love will be taken for granted or if we'll hold firm to our dignity. It's not easy. But my story is proof that there's a delicate balance between supporting our loved ones and sacrificing ourselves. We can be there for them without allowing ourselves to be disrespected or erased. Now, as I sit on my porch in the early twilight, a cup of chamomile tea in hand, I feel a sense of closure and a renewal of purpose. My short silver bob catches the last rays of sun, and I think of Joseph, hoping he's somewhere proud of how this all turned out. Ethan and Celine are mapping out a future built on mutual respect, while I continue to help other couples craft events rich in meaning. I've learned that sometimes the most significant gifts we can give are not large checks, but boundaries, honesty, and the unwavering belief that real love thrives only where there is genuine respect. Thank you so much for listening to her Fireside Stories. Today's journey with Aurelia showed us the power of boundaries, respect, and the quiet strength of a mother's love. We discovered together how staying true to oneself can ultimately bring about healing, reconciliation, and even greater joy than we could have imagined. Now I would love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a similar moment in your own life where you had to set boundaries to protect your dignity or loved ones? Share your reflections and stories in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed today's narrative, please hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell to stay updated with our latest episodes. Every subscription helps support the channel and enables us to keep bringing you these inspiring stories each week. Until next time, take care, stay warm, and keep your hearts open to life's beautiful surprises.